Hey Maxine, just we need to identify who you are and where we are right now, just for future reference. I know who you are, but whoever is looking at the tape might not. So give me your first name, your last name, and tell me where you're a missionary.
I'm I'm Maxine Stewart, and I served as a missionary in Thailand for 36 years.
Go ahead and spell that for me too. So your Maxine Stewart.
I am doing a terrible. Can we start
No,
over?
you're okay. This is just
All
for
right.
identification
Okay.
purposes.
My name is Maxine Stewart, MaxineStewart.
Okay, great. That's just for whoever might look at the tape
Okay.
later on and use the footage. Why don't we just go ahead and start by telling me a little bit about your childhood and how you first, I guess, really learned about or the concept of foreign missions or other people around the world, how all that came about.
Okay. My family lived on a farm when I was a small child, and they were regular church attenders. We attended a quarter-time church. We had Sunday school every Sunday, but only had preaching services one weekend a month. We had it on Saturday and Sunday. My father was a deacon in the church there, and my mother taught a Sunday school class. And we were not exposed to missions at that time, but the Lord gave me a wonderful blessing in my youth. Our church had Saturday night singings, and not only my parents witnessed the fact, but neighbors witnessed the facts that I hummed tunes before I could talk. And I think this was being exposed to these songs and worship services on Sunday, and then this Saturday night singing. Also, I seem to have had a special gift for my hands on a musical instrument, which we did not have. I was 15 years old before my family had a musical instrument in the home. When I was small, now a cousin told me this just 2 weeks ago. This farmhouse that we lived in at that time, there was one door that went onto a porch, and there was a drop down to go down to the porch. And my father had put some boards across the door to keep me from crawling out or falling out. And he and this cousin and his father were at our home one day, and they saw me playing on one of these planks, one of these boards across the door. And I was going up and down like I was playing a piano. And the pastor had been in our home that day, and my cousin met him out in the yard. And the pastor said to him, I've just been talking to a little missionary. Well, I didn't know these details until after the Lord called me to be a missionary. But my mother shared with me after my call, that our pastor he served 4 churches, being a quarter-time situation. He had told my parents that in one of the other churches he was preaching about missions, and he challenged the people to respond. And he said, who should come forward but his own daughter? And he said, while the congregation sang, he said, I stood there and talked her out of going to missions, and told her it wasn't really her that God was calling. He was calling married couples, so there'd be a man to do the preaching and so on. 2 weeks later, she died. And he told my parents, he said, I just want you to know that I'm praying that God will call Maxine. I never knew this until after I received the call to missions from the Lord. And I'm really glad I didn't know about it, because it might, somewhere along the way, might have swayed me to go ahead of the Lord's at some point. I had struggled with this call because I really didn't want to be a missionary. I was 16 years old before I heard about missions, and it never occurred to me that our pastor had not preached on missions. But we moved to a college town in Jacksonville, Alabama, and we attended the First Baptist Church, Jacksonville. And it was there that I was introduced to missions. I became a YWA member, and I began to learn about missions and missionaries.
It seems like a lot of that may have laid the groundwork, but in talking with y'all yesterday, which I didn't realize, it seems like the point at which you met Uncle Bob and y'all kind of developed your relationships and stuff, that was a real crucial point at which God started working on your heart. Tell me a little bit about that time period and how either other people or Uncle Bob or whatever the circumstances, what happened to kind of put it on your heart about missions.
I attended that church for several years, and one Sunday morning I met Bob Stewart from Nebraska in our Sunday school class. And as time moved on, Bob and I began to date. And while we were dating, we became quite serious. And he asked me one day, he said, "What would you think about being a pastor's wife?" Well, liking that man and loving him very much, I thought I could handle that. So I said, I think I could do that. And then he said, "Well, what if God called us to be missionaries?" And I honestly did not think God would do that to me. So I said, "Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it." And so, as time moved on, and Bob was pastoring churches, he pastored for almost 10 years before we went to Thailand. He devoured the mission publications, and he preached it from the pulpit along with the Bible teaching on missions. And I just knew, since he began preaching mission sermons about mid-November and all the way through December, I just knew it was going to be during one of those sermons that the Lord was going to get through to me. And I had 3 children, and if it got too touchy, too close, I would make sure that the children were okay, and I'd spend my time making them sit still or whatever, just to get my mind off of actually what he was talking about. Well, it wasn't there at all. He was preparing for one of those Lottie Moon sermons, and he called out to me. Now, he was pastor at Yuleton Baptist Church, and he was in his study across the bedroom and said to me in the living room where I was, he said, "Honey, I want you to sing a solo Sunday." Well, I didn't even pretend to be a soloist, and I thought he was teasing, and I said, "Oh, really, what would you like for me to sing?" And he didn't tell me the name of the song. He told me what number it was in the Broadman hymnal. Number 131, "How Long Must We Wait?" And for some reason, I turned to the piano and I started playing and singing that song. And it was at that time that God got through to me. Nobody around, just me and God in the living room. And I couldn't believe it. My first impulse was to go in the study and tell Bob what had happened, but I thought it might be an emotional effect this song was having on me. And I didn't think I could stand to see him hurt, because I had consented for him to write the Foreign Mission Board at one point when we were down in Pineapple, Alabama, write for applications. And I was filling mine out, and it got to a question, do you know you have been called by God to be a missionary? So I had to go say to Bob, I can't fill this out. God has not called me. So this particular day, I was dressed to go to the grocery store when he asked me to sing that song. And I was so shaken up, I just jumped in the car and went to the grocery store. Now, you were out there this morning, and you know it's about a 10-minute drive from there back into town. And all the way to town, I just prayed out loud. And when I got to the grocery store, I thought, I hope I don't meet anybody I know. I don't want to talk. So I went in and got my groceries and pushed my cart up to the cashier and realized I didn't have my purse, my money. Now, a normal person would have pushed the cart aside and said to her, I'll be back in about 25 minutes. I've got to go get my money. Not me. I went back and I put all this stuff back on the shelf. And I went home and got my money and came back and got the groceries. And by then it was time to go to the week of prayer meeting. Well, we just had a wonderful program that afternoon, and I wanted to tell those ladies so bad I was just about to die. But I wanted to tell Bob first, so I didn't get to say a thing about it. Well, I got home, and as I drove in the driveway, Bob was coming out of the house, putting his overcoat on. he had had one of those calls, "Preacher, can you come now?" Some woman was in the chicken house threatening to blow her head off with a shotgun. And so I said to him as I met him there on the walk coming from the house, I said, "Honey, I want to talk to you." He said, "Well, I've got to go right now, but we'll talk when I get back." He got back about 9 o'clock that night, and I was sitting at the dining table folding up baby diapers. Now, I had made me out a list of 17 reasons why I could not be a missionary during those 4.5 years that I had struggled with he might call me. And every time I could think of something really good that I could put on that list, I ran and added it to it. Well, I'd gotten that list out while Bob was gone, and I went over every one of those items, and there wasn't a thing I couldn't check off, except my mother. I hadn't told Mother yet. Now, I thought Mother would just weep and wail if I told her I was going overseas. But when we went to tell her on Sunday, she didn't shed a tear. And so Monday morning she called and she said, "Now I've had my little cry, now I can talk." And that's when she told me about the pastor saying that he was praying that that the Lord would call me to be a missionary. And so I thanked her for not ever telling me about that beforehand. She said that morning, she said, "We knew it was going to happen, we just didn't know when." So the Lord took care of her too. Not a thing on that list of 17 reasons could keep me from going. I'd put such stupid things on there like I couldn't fly. I'd been on a horse when I was little, and I could remember how my feet stuck straight out on that horseback. And I thought, as high up as I felt on that horse, if I felt that high accordingly in an airplane, there was no way I was getting in an airplane. And then I put cannot fly on my list. And the fact that I can't swim, I thought, well, there's no use trying to sail. I can't even swim. As if that would make much difference out in the middle of the Pacific. Anyway, the Lord took care of all those reasons. And when I got to share with Bob that night, when he came home about 9 o'clock, I didn't have one little girl that I put on my list. I couldn't take my little girl. What if she got sick and we didn't have any doctors? I didn't realize we'd end up living at our mission hospital for 5 years. So I put this little girl on the list. But that night, as I sat there folding those diapers, I had 3 children to take care of now, not just one. But I didn't have any qualms about taking those children overseas. And so the Lord had just done such a work in my heart and in my life that I knew that he would take care of anything that I was confronted with on the foreign mission field.
You talked about the way the pastor prayed. Do you think that, tell me what you think those things had as an effect on you becoming a missionary? And how did that nurture you to becoming?
As I remember him, he had very poor eyesight by the time I had a memory of him. And he actually became blind, but he would still be our pastor. And he lived in another community, and our family would meet him in Arab and take him out to the farm, and he'd spend the weekend with us. Most every time he came, he stayed at our house. And I can remember sitting on his lap, and I remember him hugging me, and I remember him telling me he was praying for me. But I didn't know to the extent of what he was praying for. I cannot remember any conversation we had about my being a missionary, or him praying for me to this end. I loved him very much, and even after he became blind and I began to grow up, he bought me some material for a dress to be made. And so Mother got a letter from the pastor's wife, and she wanted to know how much material he bought, which was not near enough to make me a dress. In his mind, I was still that little girl that he remembered seeing, and I didn't grow in his thinking, evidently. So he told the lady that sewed in the material, he said, "She's just a little girl." Well, I was a big girl by then. But I can't remember a conversation about missions with this man. I know he prayed for me a lot, and I'm sure the Lord heard and honored his prayer. I credited Bob with it a long time. I said to him, I think if you'd ever quit praying for me, God wouldn't have called me. But then when I found out about this pastor, somebody had been praying for me a long time.
Tell me, getting back to Uliton and the church there, tell me at that point, tell me first of all about the church and kind of what the church was like, and tell me who was influential in that building you up for the possibilities of missions. If that was Uncle Bob, then just tell me that aspect of that.
Okay. As he served churches in that 10-year period, I was a member of the WMU and worked with young people in the YWAs. Now in Pineapple, Alabama, we had 4 young people girls, and 4 young boys, young men. And there was no mission organization for the men. So we changed our name from YWA to YPA, Young People's Auxiliary, and included the boys. And we had 100% attendance nearly every time we met. And we studied missions, we had programs, we had dinners at our home. It invited missionaries like from Rachel Sims Missions in New Orleans. We had a lady come up spend the weekend with us. We had Lloyd Moon, who was a missionary in Brazil, to come, and he spoke to the young people. And we used opportunities to try to inform them about missions. Now, I wasn't up in arms about not going myself at that time, but I guess I was working on my list at that time too, because the Lord had already called Bob when he was a student in New Orleans Seminary. So when he left when we left Pineapple and came to Hewletton, I worked with the YWAs in Hewletton. We had about 10 girls altogether in Hewletton, and we met usually at my house because of the children. And it was in the study of these programs, and then we lived neighbors with the president of the WMU. And that lady didn't know anything else to talk about. Evidently, she had 7 children, but she was sold on missions. And we would talk about this. We got boxes of things together to send to the mission field. We rolled bandages. We made little baby dresses and sent to the mission field. And Mildred was always sharing what she was planning for the WMU programs. And the Sunday that we told our church about my call, she said to us, she said, "We've been knowing a long time y'all were going. We just wondered when y'all were going to find out about it." So it came as no surprise to our church family, and I don't think it was altogether my dragging my feet. I really believe, and it took me a while to figure this out, why didn't God call me when he called Bob? Bob came home and shared with me what happened, and I listened to him out, but I had nothing to share except that God had not called me. So, now what was I going to say? When the Lord did call me, yes. I was wondering why he didn't call me. Why go through this 4.5 years of struggle? I even had a partial facial stroke, and the doctor said, "You're upset about something." Well, he wanted to know if I could tell him what I was nervous about. Well, there's no way I was going to tell that doctor my struggle with this possibility that I might be a missionary. Anyway, he got my face straightened out, and I keep losing my train of thought on this.
It's hard to be pregnant with this.
Oh, yeah. So in thinking about the children, I had an awful time during the 3 pregnancies, just with my sense of smell. And I couldn't keep food down. Just any odor, boy, sent me to the bathroom. And when I got to Thailand, Thailand's a very smelly country, with all the shrimp paste and the squid and the duck farms and the fermenting tapioca. It's just a smelly country. Well, with those strong odors that you catch just even going down the main highway, I'm just not sure I could have handled a pregnancy over there. And I truly believe that the Lord let me have my family before we went. We took an 8-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old daughter, and a 14-month-old son. And I think in his wisdom, he had me to wait until the family was well on its way before he called me.
Tell me, you kind of transitioned nicely to Thailand. Tell me, looking back on all your years as a missionary in Thailand, tell me give me first the first part of when you got there and what it was like and that kind of thing, and then over the years, how you guys became part of the, people and that kind of thing. Tell me a little bit about that aspect of Thailand.
When we went to Thailand, we lived in the capital city of Bangkok while we were in language school for the equivalent of a 2-year study. But when Bob got his finished, which was about 1.5 years, they let us move out to our assigned field of service. While we were living in Bangkok, I thought, now we'll take some photographs around the house and the neighborhood and send to my mother, because Mother just knew we were going to end up living in the jungle. So we took pictures and got them developed, got them back, and lo and behold, it did look like we lived in the jungle. I couldn't send the pictures because it would have verified Mother's thinking. All the lush greenery there, with the palm trees and the banana trees, it's beautiful to look at, but when you're trying to ease somebody's feeling about it, that wasn't really what we needed to do. So we lived there in Bangkok, and the heat was one of the things that really was difficult to get used to. Now, when we stopped, we went by ship. It took 3 weeks to travel by ship, and then from California to Hong Kong, and then we flew from Hong Kong to Bangkok. Well, while we were in Yokohama at the port, we received some mail, and there was a letter from the Thailand Baptist Mission asking us to consider going to Cha Chung Sao. Well, we couldn't even pronounce the name, and we knew nothing about it. But by the time we got to Thailand, Cha Chung Sao was just a part of our vocabulary. We were traveling on the ship with some friends who were returning to Thailand, so we took the letter to them, and they were very excited. They knew a lot about Cha Chung Sao, so they shared with us what they knew. So the letter also stated that they had hired a cook and a wash girl for us. And I looked at Bob and I said, whatever will I do with 2 girls in our house? I was not used to domestic help. And so we got to Thailand, and this heat, man, it took us a while to learn to wear sweaty clothes. If we had a meeting at night and we went to language school in the morning, and sometimes we had an afternoon meeting, and having 5 members of the family, that's 15 rounds of clothes right there. And there was no way I could do the laundry and go to school and run the household. So I saw I couldn't do without this girl first week we were there. She was washing by hand. We didn't have a washing machine or anything. And then there were no supermarkets. And to go to the market to buy vegetables and fruit, you bargained for everything there. That's something I never did learn to enjoy. I had to live with it, but I didn't like it. But I couldn't even speak the language. So I saw I couldn't do it without the girl who was working in the kitchen, because she would go and she would buy the food, and she would bargain with the sellers to a reasonable price. So we saw right away we could not do without either one of them. But then as time went on there, I lost my kitchen privileges, and I was a very frustrated missionary. Even our children didn't feel free to go to the refrigerator and get a drink of water, because the cook would appear at the door and say, "What do you want?" I mean, that was her domain, and even though it was our house, we were not supposed to, it seemed like we weren't supposed to overstep our boundaries. So I said to Bob, when we moved to Cha Chung Sao, I am not having a cook. Well, one of our co-workers, Polly Morris, found out about this, and she made 3 trips over to my house trying to persuade me to get a cook. She said, "You're going to kill yourself." I said, "I'd rather go that way than to go this way." So we moved to Cha Chung Sao and got our house set up, and we had a 9-room house, and so we used one of the rooms right by the dining room for the schoolroom, because I was going to teach our children. And so we included home ec as part of their curriculum. They began by setting the table. And Bobby was so little, he had sort of tiptoe to see where to put the silverware. But he took his week about in this. And then as they learned to cook, I had an illness some in 63 that the doctor put me to bed with, and Ruth Ann took over the kitchen. She had learned to cook enough that she could handle the kitchen part pretty well with her dad's help when he was home. He had a very heavy schedule, being the area missionary and the only missionary in that province, so he wasn't home a great deal. But Ruth Ann would come up and sit by the bedside, and we'd talk about recipes, and she'd write them down in the book. And she had her little notebook, and so she would go down and fix the food. And I was really glad then that we had included the kitchen part in our school curriculum. We were struggling for ways to get the gospel before the Thai people. Bob, being the area missionary, he was going out preaching. He was doing street preaching, just in the middle of the street, or street corners, or under a shade tree, or at boat landings, or wherever people were gathered in the marketplace. And sometimes the children and I would go along, and I'd play the accordion, and that would get the crowd together to come see what the music was. If I didn't go, Bob put up a song sheet and a picture roll. We had Bible pictures, and he'd put up what we called his preaching roll and his song sheet. And the Lord blessed him with a lot of volume. So if we didn't go with the accordion, he would just stand there and sing until the people would come to see what this foreign man was doing, singing out there by himself. So we would teach English in the church. Everywhere we lived, we taught English, and also in our home. I could handle some English classes at our house when Bob would be out with the vehicle, the Lottie Moon van. And so anything that we could think of in ways to get the gospel before the people. Then we moved to Bangkok in the early 70s, and we taught English at the Baptist Student Center. Bob was the director there. And I also worked with some Thai women who were married to American servicemen, and that was an English teaching program because most of those girls could not speak very much English at all. I wondered sometimes how they got engaged and married with their limited vocabulary. But that was one of the greatest challenges that came my way. I also worked at the Mission Hospital for 8 years. I'm not medical, but when you're a missionary, you become many things. Whatever the need is, if you can fill it, then you do it. And we needed 8 Thai nurses at our Mission Hospital, and we only had 4. So our director of nurses, Rosemary Spessard, asked me if I could work in some time to give the girls so they could get some sleep, and they were having to do 2 shifts, and that's hard work. So she told me she could teach me everything I needed to do, which she did, and I wrote everything down. And the last day I left, I still had my notebook within reach of everything that I was supposed to do, like all the admissions, all the discharges, ordering all the lab work, the medications, writing out medical cards, everything that had to be written, I did most of it. The 3 years we lived in Bangkok, we decided at Christmas time to invite our neighbors, so we'd have an opportunity to share the real Christmas story with them. And Bob hand wrote little invitations, and we sent them out, and only one person responded. We did not ask them to let us know if they could come, but this one neighbor lady responded, and behind her name were some initials. And Bob said, now I don't know what that means, but it has something to do with the royal family. So we called Moogie in and asked her if she knew what these letters meant. Moogie was the girl who worked with us. And she said, oh, that means she's a princess. Well, I looked at Bob and I said, now how do we gracefully get out of this? And Bob said, if she doesn't know the Lord, she's as lost as any of them, and we'll just go ahead with our plan, because the whole idea was to share the Christmas story and about Christ coming. And so we went ahead with our dinner, and through her, we met her brothers and sisters at a party she had at her house the following Christmas. And somebody asked us if we'd ever had our dinner plate served by 5 princesses before. But they were a lovely family. This neighbor lady and her husband had been married by the king of Thailand. He performed their wedding ceremony. Now, we had the opportunity to meet the king and queen when we lived in Cha Chung Sao. And they came to one of the main temple there in Cha Chung Sao. It was quite an event because no royal person or high government official had been to Cha Chung Sao since the present king's brother had died. His brother had been through Cha Chung Sao, and another high government official had been, and they died shortly after they were in Cha Chung Sao. So the government officials decided that Cha Chung Sao was jinxed, so they wouldn't come through there. Well, the day came when the king and queen came to the temple there, and it was a day to remember. So the Thai pastor asked me to have some flowers to present to her in case she stopped her car, had her car stopped and talked to us. Well, before her car came along, they whisked us off to the temple to talk to her, or to present the flowers over there. So when we approached her and gave her the flowers, I thought I would just present the flowers and she'd thank me and I would back up and tell her goodbye. It didn't happen that way at all. I told her, well, I couldn't get anybody to help me with what to say. I asked the pastor, I said, I don't even know what to say. And he said, whatever you say will be fine. You are an American. And so when we got to the temple, the first person I saw inside the gate was my former Thai teacher. So I thought Crusoe would help me with the speech. And she said, oh, it won't matter what you say, just speak slowly, so she won't have to ask you to repeat. And so Bob helped me get some thoughts together on the fact that I represented the Christians in Cha Chung Sao, and we'd invited Bung Kla to be a part of this. And so Bung Kla Church had helped buy materials to make the archway over the street that Baptist had put up. And our Baptist Mission Hospital had a part in that. So when I told her I represented these 3 Christian groups, and in my excitement, I just said, and all the people in America who sent me to Thailand, she doesn't know enough about churches to ask questions about churches, but she is the president of the Red Cross, and she picked up on our hospital. And so she began to ask me questions about why we built the hospital where we did. And I told some of them I hated to tell her why, because she had made a real effort to get medical work out in the outlying areas. But she seemed very appreciative of the fact that we chose a place where there were no doctors. And it seemed like we talked forever. And all these, there must have been at least 40 photographers out there. Everybody who was anybody in Cha Chung Sao province was there, including the governor, and all the officials. And these photographers were snapping away. And so when I got ready to depart from her, I thought, I don't even know how to leave her. So I just put my hands together and was going to say, log on, you know. And when I put my hands together, I saw her hand extended to shake my hand. And then the king stepped over and shook my hand. I told him I thought if the queen had reached over to shake Bob's hand, he'd have just gone right into orbit. But she was very easy to talk with. It was just like the 4 of us were all that was there. But you know how thoughts race through your mind? As we shook hands, the thought went through my mind that anybody out there would have given anything in the world to have been me at that moment, because I did something they will never be able to do. I shook hands with their queen. And that was a high point in my life. And I had thought Dr. Gocher should present the flowers, but she was there, and Joe Willis, one of our nurses, was there. And Ajahn Pai Boon said no, said everybody in Cha Chung Sao knows you, and besides that, you've got on a dress. They had on their uniforms. And so that was why he thought I should present the flowers.
Mention your last 18 years.
For the last 18 years we were in Thailand, I was the Baptist press representative. And when I was elected, I stood on the mission meeting floor to try to reason with the mission because I had not had journalism. And I knew that several of our co-workers had. And Betty Alexander said, but who gets things printed? Well, I'd had 4 or 5 things that I'd written in, feature stories that had been picked up in the commission. And Bob tugged at my skirt and said, go ahead and take it, I'll help you. He had had journalism. But as busy as he was, I knew about how much help I'd get out of him. But I did enjoy writing, and so I went ahead and accepted it. And it was kind of like working at the hospital, and I ended up working with leper people, something I never dreamed I would do. And here I ended up being the press representative for 18 years without training, which helped me to know this is God's working in my life and through my life. And this is what has happened in the music. I started out in the farmhouse on the back door steps. I didn't know about the plank in the door till 2 weeks ago. But I can remember sitting on the back door steps on the farm. The back of the step was not filled in. So I'd sit on one step, run my feet through, and the next step was my marvelous piano. And the next step was where I put my hymn book. And I can remember sitting out there just singing my head off. And then an aunt let us, when I was about 15, an aunt let us keep a pedal organ. And that organ didn't even have a stool with it. But we had a rocking chair in the living room, and I'd pull that rocking chair up and sit on the arm, and I'd pedal away. And the neighbors would come in, and we'd have singings at our house. And then when we moved to Jacksonville, my father bought a piano. And it was a great source of joy, and we shared it with a lot of homesick students who were there working on their degree. And then we moved, as Bob became a pastor and we were in church fields, Pineapple Church had an electric organ. And I figured if I could play the piano, I could play that organ. And sure enough, I had the joy of playing that electric organ. And then when we went to Thailand, the good Lord in his kindness let me learn to play the Renat Ek, because even to this day I cannot read music. But the Lord has given me a feel, not just an ear for music, but a feel for music. And as Dr. Gocher said, she knew if I could get the feel of the Thai music, I could play the Renat Ek. And the Lord finally opened up my mind after 3 people had taken a lot of time to sit on the floor and sing to me as I practiced. And one of these hymns began to go over in my mind one night after we'd gone to bed, had not yet gone to sleep, and I jumped up and went in the living room, and I sat there and I played 4 hymns, one right after the other, Thai hymns. And Oriental music is not easy for me to latch onto. I had not been able to get a handle on it till that night. And while we were in Thailand, I counted up the other day how many different places I played that instrument, including the Rotary Club in Bangkok that Bob became a member of, because he found out that if he became a member of that Rotary Club, he was going to get to preach to those men. They would never come to our church to hear him preach. But if they're not going to come to you and you get an opportunity to take the message to them, then you need to do that. So he became a Rotarian in Bangkok, and on his day, every Rotarian was supposed to tell why they wanted to be a Rotarian. And Bob said, I'm going to get to preach to those men. And so he asked me to go with him on his day to speak, because he wanted to close with 2 Thai hymns. And so when the man introduced him, he said, this was a neighbor who is a doctor, he said, this is one man we won't have to translate for us, and he speaks our language. So when he finished and we went down to the end of the banquet room to do the Thai music, when I started playing the introduction for Bob to sing, the men just burst into an applause. He hadn't even sung yet. And they said, not only do they speak our language, they sing our songs. And so the Lord has given me so many wonderful opportunities with the Thai music. I just praise him so much. I had an opportunity as I was growing up to learn to read music. It didn't take. It was a barrier there. And I think the Lord has kept me from learning music to let me know this is his thing in my life. All my music is strictly by the grace of God.
That's great. That works in nicely. Tell me real quickly, real briefly. I have two questions left for you, Aunt
All
Maxine.
right.
First of all, tell me real briefly how you feel the support from the people in Anniston and in the church that we shot yesterday and that kind of thing. How have you felt over the years as a missionary? How have you felt that support?
Well, I had the wonderful privilege of hearing Bob as he informed most of the church membership about missions, especially the men. When we moved there, was in December, and there was one more Sunday for him to preach before the Lottie Moon monies were taken. And so he told the deacons he was going to preach on missions on Sunday, and then after the service give the people an opportunity to contribute to the Lottie Moon offering. And so they said, well, he could do that if he wanted to, but they thought that the church had already given all they planned to give, which was something like $47. Well, Bob preached that Sunday, and as I said, he had been devouring the mission publications as well as the Bible about missions, and he presented it from the pulpit, and it was really a heart-stirring time after the service that day, as men came to him, and some of them hugged him with tears rolling down their face and dripping off, saying, "Preacher, we just didn't know about this." And so we saw how they latched onto this as he informed them. And some of the women who didn't attend the mission organizations, they learned too. And the mission giving increased the next year to $1,500, and the next year to $2,500, then the next year to $3,000. And they've just never been satisfied giving less than that, because they know about the needs now and their responsibility in helping to meet these needs to send the people who are taking the message of Christ to the other countries. They've been very supportive in writing letters and encouraging us on the field, sharing with us things that are happening in the church. They've had some pastors who wanted to cut back on the cooperative program giving, and boy, the people rose to battle. And we're just so grateful for this, but we feel like the pastor holds the key to informing the people about missions and about the cooperative program giving. If he isn't sold on it, he's not going to sell his people on it. But if he studies God's Word and finds out the real meaning of missions and what kind of support system we have. We had some co-workers in Thailand that said they just could hardly keep from envying the Thailand Baptist Mission support system. They said they had to spend over half their time writing letters to encourage people to send money, or to send their pledged money already, or to write thank you notes. And they said, you don't have to fool with that. You can do what you came to do without having this obstacle here. And it's very difficult on us because we have to spend so much of our time doing this other necessary thing. So we appreciate the churches, not just this church, but other churches that Bob has had, have been very supportive. And then the Parker Memorial Baptist Church wanted to sponsor us. That is, they sent our salary to the Foreign Mission Board every month and sponsored us in this way, as they did 3 or 4 other families. And so as we come back, we have an opportunity on furlough to share with these people how their monies were spent and things that they've had a part in that they were not there to see. But we definitely feel like they're as much a part of what we did as we were. We could not have made it without their financial support and their prayer support.
Your sister, brother,
When my parents became ill, my sister went to their home to take my father to Birmingham to the hospital. And they walked out their door, locked the door, and they never did go back again. When my father left the hospital, my sister moved him into, my parents into her home. And they got a hospital bed and a male nurse to help my father every day. And then when my brother-in-law, who was a pharmacist, got off work, he and my sister took care of my parents through the night. And for 10 years they did this and let us stay on the mission field. And I am just so grateful to them for this, because I feel like they've had a real ministry through us as we served there. Had they not taken my parents, then very likely we would have had to come home to help take care of them.
That's great. Tell me, over from the point that you were a little girl and making the lists, and now you've been on the mission field, you guys were on the mission field for all those years, and you look back at it now, do you regret?
I have no regrets. My only regret is that I didn't have better judgment than to fret about it, because the Lord is as faithful in Thailand as He is in Alabama. What He says He will do, He did. He was always there, no matter what. And when we faced the day every day, we knew He was there with us, and He walked beside us all the way. We got discouraged at times in a slow response, but He would use somebody or something to lift our spirits and keep us on the task. And we never once considered coming back to America. And our children even, as well as us, we weren't as vocal about it perhaps as our children were. When we come home further, they wouldn't know when we were going home. And so Thailand became such a part of our life. And even when Bob would be away many days and nights at a time, and after the children grew up and left home, I was the only American in Chachoengsao town. And this was about 50,000 people. And you don't have anybody next door to maybe call on, but I had some good Thai neighbors, and we had a little system set up that Bob installed that if I needed some help, they knew the signal. And fortunately, I never had to use that. But when I think about my list, which I still have, and go over it sometime, I think, why in the world did I put something like that on my list? Knowing the Lord of everything, could take care of it all. But I just was not willing to trust Him in it at that point. But He is faithful, just like He says He will be.
Great. Do you have any questions, Gunther?
Nope.
Maxine? Okay.
I think you covered it.
Great. You did a wonderful job.
Oh,
We're rolling.
Go ahead and identify yourself first and spell it out
Okay,
for
my
me.
name is Bob Stewart, B-O-B-S-T-E-W-A-R-T. I served the same length of time as Maxine did. We went in 1958 and were retired in 1994.
Okay. Tell me, Uncle Bob, about just briefly about your growing up and how God kind of touched your heart for missions.
Okay, I grew up born and grew up in a town called Chadron, Nebraska. It's way up in the northwest corner, close to Wyoming, South Dakota. We were not really in big church, as I call it, but we had a little mission Sunday school in our part of town, across the tracks, and I did attend Sunday school quite a bit growing up. And then at the age of 12, the pastor came to visit in my grandparents' home when I was there one day, and he was really trying to witness to my uncle, who was totally indifferent. And so he started talking to me a little bit, and then before he left, he asked to have prayer. And so in his prayer, he prayed for my dad, who was in the hospital with appendicitis. And I got real emotional. I mean, thinking about my dad and concerned. And so everybody interpreted that I was really under conviction and sorry for my sins and all of that. And they said, are you ready to profess Christ? And I was always a pretty obedient boy, and I thought, well, I don't want to let the folks down, so I agreed to it and went ahead and got baptized and started going to church very faithfully. In fact, I was president of our youth group and our associational youth group, and edited our youth paper and a whole bunch of things. Huh?
Sing in the choir.
Oh, I tried to sing in the choir. And whatever was going on, I was kind of in the middle of it. And in our high school class in our high school, we had 65 graduate my year in 46. In our whole high school, there were only 3 of us boys who went to church anywhere. And so we were pretty much in the minority. And I did try to take a stand, but I really did not have an experience with the Lord for several more years, but everybody was interested in me, and I was about the only young fellow in our church, and had a lot of encouragement to be a preacher. And so the church actually licensed me to preach before I'd really experienced my salvation, but I was wanting to do the right thing all those days. And the only thing I remember about missions, and I can't really say that this had any impact on me, but one of our pastors in my younger years was a former missionary to China. He was actually, I think, a Southern Baptist missionary. He had studied at Southwestern, and he went to the mission field as a single man and met a lady. I don't remember what her denomination was, and they got married. And then she was in bad health, and they had to come home. And she had a trunk full of little Chinese children's clothing. And every so often we would put on a little play with these little caps and everything, you know. And usually I was in the play, but I just remember being in it. I can't really remember getting any kind of feeling about missions or thinking I wanted to go to China or ought to go to China or anything like that. So after I really got saved, and after Maxine and I had married, and this was at Howard College in my sophomore year, I really had an experience with the Lord. And then shortly after that, I really did have a call to preach from the Lord. And we started, and I had a church not long after that, in college days. And the last year that we served the church, I had actually finished college, and I had been a janitor in the previous church where we lived when our first daughter was born. They paid me $100 a month. So I got a raise up to $65 a month. I really lost $35 a month when I took this church because they paid me less than the janitor's job did. So I had to go to work at a steel mill in Birmingham, you know, to actually earn some money for our family. And that was about a year that I did that, and we decided it was time to go on to seminary. And that's when we went to New Orleans, which was in the fall of '41. Well, the fall of our second year, I think it was the end of my first year when I got a call to a church over here in Clark County, Alabama. But anyhow, the beginning, almost the first session of our second year in the general missions class, history of missions, I think it was, we had one of our classmates, Corky Ferris, had been over in the Orient as a summer missionary or helping the missionaries. And he was just sharing about how few missionaries and preachers there were in the Orient, and how anxious and hungry the people seemed to be to get the tracts. He was giving out tracts. And just what a great need there was, you know. And I was looking around the room, I remember the different guys that seemed to have a lot of potential, you know, about he'd make a good missionary and he'd make a good missionary, and I was thinking along those lines, and it's just like the Lord spoke to me and said, why don't you go? And that's the day I went rushing home and telling Maxine about it, and I was all excited. And about that time, then we had Missions Week. Pretty soon after that, Dr. Coffin came and preached, and I tried to get Maxine to go forward, and she was honest enough to say that she hadn't really had a call. And in fact, she told me one time that she'd be glad to go and do the housework, you know, be the housewife, take care of the kids and everything, and let me be the missionary. But of course, Foreign Mission Board doesn't agree to that kind of arrangement. So we did have a wait of like about 4.5 years until the Lord saw it was the timing to call her. And we were ready to go. I mean, we were anxious to go. And we were appointed, I guess, within 7 months after we made our very first initial contact with the board. So the missions impact on my life really came after I became a pastor and started studying about missions. Basically, in the Commission magazine, I only had that one missions course because in seminary it didn't look like we were ever going to be missionaries, so I didn't study the strategy of missions and the methodology and all of that. We had no training like that, which may or may not be a plus, I don't know. But somehow, and I was thinking about this when you asked Maxine about our getting into Thai culture and all of that, the Lord just gave us somehow the realization that Thailand is not going to be like Alabama, and just accept that it's different and not necessarily question all of it or try to rationalize it, or just it's just the way it is, and you accept it and live with it and enjoy it, and that's part of your life. So that the mindset, which I know had to come from the Lord, was really one of the best things we had, I guess, in going, and the idea that we would need to learn and be adaptable and just relate to whatever we found there, and knowing how to try to share the gospel and relate to the people.
Tell me about how you came to Alabama, how the Lord led you, and about the military and all that kind of thing.
All right, I like to share that with young people, especially as example of Romans 8:28. I had hoped to win a scholarship in our high school. They only had one scholarship for the whole class, and that was the aggregate grade of the 4 years. And when the grades were announced, I came in second, 1%. I think the girl beat me, had a 96 average, and I had 95. And so I was living with my grandparents, and my family was on the West Coast and had not had any support from them, and they weren't financially able to help. So that's when the Army recruiters came around right at the end of World War II and said that the GI Bill was still in effect. And they also had a short enlistment because they were needing a lot of volunteers to take place of the draftees who were coming home from the war. So I volunteered or enlisted for an 18-month period, which gave me 30 months of GI Bill, enough to finish college at Howard College, with taking a lot of credits, a lot of hours each quarter. And I had hoped, the guys had sort of halfway promised me that I could get in the Air Force, which was everybody's dream, I guess. But I wound up in the infantry and was sent to Fort McClellan, which was an infantry replacement training center at that time. And I think I joined on the 31st of May of 1946 and went to Fort Leonard Wood, and that's where we got our haircuts and uniforms and all that. And then we came on the train into Fort McClellan, Alabama, which is just outside of Anniston, Alabama. And after 8 months basic training there, then I was assigned to the motor pool office on the base, and I served there most of the rest of my time until Fort McClellan was closed down, and spent a few months in Fort Jackson before I was mustered out in November of '47.
Tell me about, in Thailand, tell me about how you feel God, once you got there, allowed you to become part of the culture, and how you feel like, even though younger, you may not have thought you would have wound up living most of your days in Thailand. Tell me a little bit about the aspect of that.
Well, the whole thing, I so often think about what Paul said in the 1 Corinthians 15:10, by the grace of God, I am what I am. And I look back and just can't believe that a very poor boy from way out in Nebraska, didn't even grow up as a Southern Baptist, but I could be, the Lord would work it out where I could be a Southern Baptist missionary and be halfway around the world and have such a enjoyable ministry in Thailand. the Lord picked Thailand out for us, I'm sure, because we had some other ideas after we were sure of our calls. And when it came time, the Foreign Mission Board was asking us to let them know where we felt like God was leading us to. And I had frankly been concerned about race relations in the South, because I'd grown up in a town with only 2 or 3 black people, and I had very high ideals about things like that, and came to the South and saw some things that I felt were bad, you know, bad treatment. So I didn't know too much. I didn't really know a lot about the situation when I first got here. But thinking about maybe doing something for black people, that maybe the Lord would lead us to go to Africa. But we went to our orientation conference. Now this was in 1958, they only had 10 days. And this was held at Baylor University campus, mostly in the Student Union building there. And only about half of those people were actually appointed. They had a different setup than they do now. If you had as much as your personal history turned in, then you would go to orientation. And so we went to the first conference dealing with Africa, but there was really no feeling that this was the Lord's will, no spark there. And we were praying very earnestly, of course, the Lord to let us know, because it was time to decide. And I guess it was the next morning that I went over to the Student Union building first, and then later Maxine went by the same table, and we each one separately picked up this little tract about Thailand and the great needs of the country, and very few Christians that were there, only 1 in 1,300. And the Lord just seemed to use that to speak to each of our hearts separately, and we really didn't have a chance to share with each other till that night when we got back to the dormitory room. But we were very excited about it. And we went to see Dr. Winston Crawley. He was our area secretary at that time, and probably the next day, as soon as we could get to him, and told him that we felt that the Lord was calling us to go to Thailand, and was there a need there, you know, and I mean, we knew there was a need.
Okay, you had us in the middle of that.
Yeah, Dr. Crawley, we told him about our feelings, and he said, oh, that's great. He said, we haven't had anyone appointed for over a year, and we need missionaries in Thailand. He said, one thing though, he said, I need to warn you that the work there is very slow. And he said, do you think you can work in that kind of situation or cope with that? And of course I laughed and said, well, Dr. Crawley, that's the only kind of work I've ever been in so far, which is true. I mean, always small churches, you know, and in old settled communities. It was not booming subdivisions and all that like a lot of church situations are. So after we got there and through the years, we just seemed to be well suited to each other. The Thai people and us, we're fairly slow moving and plugging along type of people, especially me. And just from the beginning, like I said earlier, we realized that it's going to be different. But one wonderful experience that I had, and I think Maxine could share in it some, but the first time we went to visit our new home church there in Chachung Sao. Now Chachung Sao was one of only only three churches in all of southeast Thailand at that time, evangelical churches. And it was made up of the beginnings of the Chachung Sao Baptist Church were Chinese Christians who had immigrated there to try to find work back in the 1930s. And they had formed their worship group, and the church, I don't know when it was actually constituted, you know, none of them really remember that much about it, but the members now are made up of some of the originals, not now, but when we were there, we got there in 1958, and then their children, our grandchildren, and some other people that have been won to the Lord. But when we went that first Sunday, which was December 7th of 1958, it was just a little low storefront wooden building. I couldn't tell you how many people were there. It was a pretty good crowd, seemed like. And when we were introduced, the chairman of the church council stood up and gave us a welcome. This was a little small Chinese fella, and the pastor translated into Thai, and Ronald Hill, who was with us, translated into English. And the pastor was just so full of tears, and he just said, we thank God for answering our prayers. We've been praying for a long time for him to send us a missionary family to work with us and help us reach out. He said, we want to win our province to the Lord, these people, but the language barrier and cultural barriers and racial feelings and things, he said, we just haven't been able to do very much on our own. And we just feel like if we had a missionary family to work with us, that we could really serve the Lord better and see the work go better. And as he spoke, and with such a deep feeling, and I don't know, just the feeling that came over my heart was that now you are home. That's just the way I felt. You've finally gotten home after, all these years and study and preparation and this, and now you're home. And when we checked back, it turned out to be exactly 1 year to the day since Maxine had her call there at the piano in our pastorium at Uliton. And I don't know, just from that point, we continued to go back. They were just having Thai services once a month at first, and Ronald was preaching some and others. And after about 4 months, I started preaching the Thai service best I could. But we visited every month, and we never had to decide where we're going to go. We got the letter in Yokohama, and we were able to focus on that place, and that's just been home, even though, we lived in Bangkok a while, and of course Bangkla is still in Chachoengsao province. But I think from that time on, we've just have felt at home there, and the music, the people's way of thinking, their language, everything has just been so comfortable to us that it's been a lot harder adjusting to retirement. I'll just be frank with you. It's like we're now away from home, and we don't say a lot of this. I mean, you can't say too much to folks here because it's not their fault that we feel that way, and we're not putting Alabama down. We like it here too, and the Lord will help us get adjusted. But I remember one time at our all Thailand Baptist youth camp. Now, we had about 4 main groups of Baptists in Thailand. We had our Thailand Baptist, it's a convention really that made up of Thai speaking, and then the 12th division of the Church of Christ in Thailand, which was the Swat Thao Baptist Church and their missions. And then you have the Lahu Baptists up in the north and the Korean Baptists. So all 4 of these were separate associations, but when I was at the Student Center, when Maxine and I were at the Student Center, we found out about going to be an Asian Baptist Youth Fellowship Conference. The 4th one that ever been held was going to be held in Thailand, and I found out the last minute when the previous director left that I was in charge. It was my responsibility to take charge of this and see that this meeting was arranged and everything. And so we called representatives of all these groups and got started on it. Well, that's the first time in our history that all the Baptists had really worked together. Later on, a Thailand Baptist Fellowship was formed, but this conference preceded that by several years, about 3 or 4 years. Anyhow, out of that, we had a wonderful meeting. We had 10 or 12 nations represented. They met at our Baptist campgrounds. The previous meetings had all been subsidized by the missions. We did not receive a penny from any mission. We took only the registration fee of $15 a person, and we had $10,000 left over that was made into a scholarship fund. Everybody was just amazed that we were able to have this meeting on so economically, and yet we provided free tours. We provided all kind of things that were special for the participants. And we had couple days after it was over, we had a dinner at the student center out in the lawn to thank everybody. We had about 40 committee members altogether. And so I was asked to speak, and I said, you know, we've had such a good camp, I mean a good conference, and we've done it economically. The year before, the treasurer of the one in the Philippines had absconded with the money. They still don't know how much was taken. And like I said, every other meeting before that had been subsidized one way or the other. Yeah, and we did ours, and so I said, well, we saved money because everybody worked so hard. Not only that, for the first time in history, even the committee members paid their registration fees. Prior to that, they were always allowed to go free because they were on the committee. But they agreed to pay. I remember the night we decided that, and I wasn't sure, you know, how they would do, but they were all happy to do it. And we did all the work. Like, we had to transport a lot of mattresses and stuff from the Baptist school there, you know, at Maxine, down to our camp. Well, we just, one of our Thai friends was able to borrow an old truck, and all of our committee members, including myself, who wound up being chairman of the housing committee, we just hauled all those down. It didn't cost us anything. And so I made this nice speech about everybody working so hard, and so it was Ajahn Boonkrong's time. Now, he was chairman of the food committee, and you know Ajahn Boonkrong, and he stood up and he said, I'll tell you in one word, one sentence, why we had money left over. He said, "Mai me corruption." No corruption. And of course that's true, you know. I mean, we were honest. The year meeting before that, 5 years before, the report's never been given. We had our financial report ready within 4 days by the time the meeting was over. Well, I'm saying all that, which is extraneous, to say that out of that, then we had a Thailand Baptist Fellowship started for a few years, and we had an annual camp. One of those camps, I'd been asked to teach the Book of Revelation in 3 hours, and it was pretty well done, I guess. But anyhow, the first day at the camp, I met this American girl. She was in her 20s, and she had 2 little boys with her. She was from Kentucky. She had married a Thai boy who had been a student there, who was now a businessman down in, down in
Southern part.
On the Gulf there. He was American Baptist. And she said, I'm so happy to meet you. Said, I wanted my little boys to have an American granddaddy this week. But then she went on to say that one of the young men in her church said, this week, said, you're going to meet a missionary. Said, he's American on the outside, but he's Thai on the inside. And to me, that was about as great a compliment, you know, as I ever had. And it was, I just give the Lord credit for somehow just helping us to feel that way about the Thai Christians. And of course, I worked under our Thai board of directors for a number of years in charge of leadership training. We had 3 or 4 Thai who were on the committee governing my work, and they had to say, you know, over what I was doing. And it's just the Lord just gave us that gift, I guess.
Let me ask you, kind of in conclusion, the same thing I asked Aunt Maxine about, are there any regrets from the point that you're a little boy looking back and now you've spent a lifetime in Thailand? Were there any regrets?
No, it's just a miracle that we just feel so privileged and honored that you know, the Lord would allow us and help us and give us the privilege of doing that. And even now, I remember thinking about missionaries all the way down the line of how I always put them up on a big high pedestal. And I still feel that way about the other missionaries. When we were at retirement, I just felt so in awe and so honored to be with that group of people. And it's just still hard to accept the fact that we were part of that group, you know. We just, to me, I just feel so unworthy, but I'm just so thankful that the Lord helped us to serve Him, and we were enabled to do all the things Maxine told you about, and training these pastors. It was, I wouldn't have swapped my job for anybody's. The close relationship I had with them. Before we left, we had 15 send-offs by different groups, some churches.
That's just Christian groups.
Yeah.
Besides all the others.
And just saying these things about us, and you know, you just kind of wonder who they're talking about sometimes. We had an opportunity to really be close to Thai people, and it was just the nature of our work that we were able to do that. And because we had developed these relationships over the years, just as a co-worker, not any kind of an official capacity, then when it became my opportunity in time to take over the leadership training program, I had, you know, just open doors everywhere. And these men would come, and women, and study and want to learn, and we just had a great relationship. So that's why we get so homesick, you know, because we had so many Thai friends over there. And we weren't antisocial toward our mission friends. We enjoyed our missionary friends too, but really the focus of our life there, 99%, was with the Thai. And so, you know, that's what we're having to get adjusted to now. But as I mentioned to you earlier today, I'm hoping to continue a writing ministry and soon get started on the book of Daniel for commentary, Bible commentary. And I think if once that gets going well, I really feel like we're back in the work, even though we prayed for them regularly and have lots of letters. We get letters from these Thai friends, just several a week, and keep right back to them, you know, and there's still a lot of close ties there. But I think when I'm actually get back to doing some work that will help with the work there, that'll make us feel better about it.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all did a great job.
Take any credit for making a lot of sacrifice because I enjoyed it so much.
Mm-hmm.
Even sleeping on the floor, and it's things we had to eat, but it was the fellowship and the camaraderie was just so wonderful. And then when these fellows would, like at our pastor school, leadership school, we'd have a lengthy prayer meeting the last night, and each one would stand up and share what was going on in their church and different things, and they were so expressive of their gratitude for us spending time with them and teaching them and materials and everything, that it's like saying sick 'em to a dog or something. You just want to keep doing your best and trying to help them.
Well, Stan was talking about, he was listing some missionaries one day, and he didn't call Bob's name. And somebody reminded him of it. He said, he's just one of us.
He's not a missionary, huh? He's a Thai.
So, all right, sure.
Is this glass going to reflect too much? I'm shaking his hand. I got the other one right on top of his, just the way I used to do.
Oh, really?
He kindly grinned, and at that time he was not a smiling king. He had taken a vow after his brother died that he'd never smile again.
Really? I didn't realize that story.
But he cracked a grin when Bob clasped him with both hands.
I was no more aware of that, you know.
Yeah.
It just came natural with you.
Right. And everything that we got from the Photoshop over there in Chopskin Sour, Mount Cloud 1. Huh?
Oh, we had photographers bringing boxes of pictures over for us to buy all of, which we didn't. We just picked out about a half a dozen of the ones we wanted.
And this was really the very best one with all four of us, and was used in newspapers here, back home, back then. And I think it came out in the commission.
Yeah, it came out in little tie-in
Booklet we
brochure
had
that
said-
told about tie work.
Uh-huh. We just had so many of these extra
Okay.
little treats.
That's right.
These people that rent our home there in Bangkok, that was a very elite group of people.
Well, y'all are probably the only
Well,
people that
actually,
have ever.
4 of those princesses visited us in Cheongsam South.
Are y'all the only missionaries that have ever actually met and shook hands with the king and queen? I think y'all probably are.
Yes, so any really personal contact like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Some have been in
Dad was telling me that he went and got the gift or whatever, and he was
Right.
telling me about it. It was like he was there with 300 other people or something.
Well, this particular day at the temple yard, you know, an enclosure that you go in.
A big yard.
Yeah, before you go on into the main temple building, but.
Then that part is, gotta has fence around it.
Right. And there weren't anybody with gifts in there or heard things at the end of the ceremony, which we found out was gonna be about 8 o'clock that night. And so we told the master of ceremonies as the
Okay. Kind of a neat shot.
what?
Kind of a neat shot.
Really? Ooh.
Two more artsy fartsy things here. Make a break.
Yeah,
You're not having much luck with it, are you?
in Bangkok.
No, when she ran into.
No, she ran in
Oh,
the front.
grandma.
She ran in the front door.
Can I have y'all do that?
No, it did not have, but it needed it. It was a good place to cook one. The Sneeds lived over there.
Sure did. Now this way, it's so marvelous.
Okay, hold on just a second.
Going right, you go left, and there.
You swing your arms, you can, if you have opposite feet.
Okay, and we're ready. Is fine.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, and go ahead.
What's that metal screen?
Okay, great. He's like Jack Martin. They're both terribly shy.
Yeah, similarity.
My dad, we get into Houston, and Mom and Dad came down and met with us. And since I was going to be down in Houston, they were up in Dallas. They drove down, and we get to the hotel, and Dad had gotten there just like about 15-20 minutes before us. And we're walking in, and I say something, and he says, "Well, according to Salazar, such and such." And I said, "Who?" He said, "Salazar, the guy at the desk." I go, "Dad, you're already on a first name basis with everything."
Oh my.
Together.
When they let you play, darling.
Yeah. I didn't even know we could find that.
He don't.
He did in Atlanta. He came right up and got Maxine's hands, playing his instrument, and got right in my face later on, and I was singing. We have no idea what he did really with anything.
Chase, you! Yeah, let's really do one. Let me get rid of it. Let's do it. I just ride it first. There's no basketball. This has never been tried before. You gotta go scrub them off or something. They're pretty sharp. Or the branch thing. You ready to film this one?
Yeah.
Man, I've got grass and crap everywhere.
You gonna film it from that position?
Mm-hmm.
You.
From behind.
Hello, camera. No. Please don't drop me. Look out, man. Relax.
Ready up. Touch it.
Spread your legs.
Daughter, little girl, we were here to get a baby, $4,000, 6 shots in the shoulder. And I basically tried to witness to him best I could, but the heart hit. Did he, was he put down? I think very briefly, it wasn't probably what it should have been. He although you'd have more of a management type out of it, sure. Church here, when just before we came home, a friend of ours was chairman of the chemical committee representing the church. Voted to honor us by giving lots of the cemetery and kids stuff. And had picked it out yet. I think it's Thursday, we'll maybe have dinner with them. God really does work in the cemetery. Don't bring us out there. We'll have a spare pot in here and a pile at home.
Pretty big gift, huh?
Yeah, I didn't need more.
that mountain in Nan. And we did a little hill in Korea also. Oh yeah. I told you about that place that Erica and I went to in Toledo. I mean, not Toledo, in Seville in Spain. It was this Muslim-like big tower. I mean, it was like probably, I don't know, it was a good 20 stories plus up really steep steps. We got all the way to the top. No, we were, he's leading this other lady down. The other lady was blind. It was like, this lady, poor lady, walked all the way up there and then didn't get to see anything. And the whole point was to be able to see, you know.
Trying to get into the room, and one of the windows running to the next room, I guess. Lost his footing and fell.
Oh man.
Got quite a few years old. I think he was kind of an exchange student.
Yes, sir. We'll go to one.
That's right.
All right.
You okay? Just act natural now.
Mm-hmm.
The area where the tracks came in. Getting your picture, okay?
Sounds good.
This is for a missionary magazine. We won't be sending it to anybody else.
All right.
Find where those tracks come into?
Sure.
I think we might can find it.
Okay.
I haven't been out here years and years, but can't have changed that much. My brother was a Marine, and they his shoes were always shiny. But they didn't do they use that weather? Yeah. Are you getting pretty good with about Buddhist Garden. You may have seen both of these, and I forgot what the other one is. They had hoped to make one film, but they actually got enough footage for two. And it was originally going to be based on a typical day in the life of four or five people. That was kind of he lined up a Thai preacher and a Thai fellow who was kind of an artist in the court. Then he never become a Christian. He never was not, as far as I know. Yesterday we were walking through our steps there because they had to take large shots several times. But one time at the local market, I didn't even know there were still places like this left out here. Not any bunks in there or anything, are there?
No, it says home of the U.S. Army chemical operation.
To attack, sort of. But it's just like what we used to live in, so I guess you could. And then when I moved over to the other area, I moved into something like this right here, which is more typical of modern day army.
Yeah. Those over there look fairly new.
Those are probably family units. The last couple months we were here was pretty neat. We got moved right up on top of the hill, which I don't even know how to get there. It was the old main post.
Okay.
Cheaper and convenient.
Alright. We're here to save the fort, boys. Hope we can.
One thing about GI, so I got a nice car. Yeah. Well, everything is provided, so all they need is provided.
It's got an extra R in the Sorrel's name.
That's right.
3 R's.
3 R's.
Beat the Sorrel.
Sorrel. That's right.
Yeah, they have the Seals, the Sorrels, and the Lunsfords active missionaries right now. It's, for church this size, it's a pretty good statement.
Yeah.
Okay.